Okay, hey, welcome. We're gonna knock this out real quick. This is chapter 4. Boom, we're gonna talk about civil liberties slideshow from the beginning. Okay, not a ton of, well, actually there is a ton of information. And to be honest, this thing right here could probably be its own semester-long class. We're talking about the Bill of Rights, or more specifically, the first 8 amendments of the Constitution. The first 8 deal with your civil liberties, and then the last 2 kind of deal with functions of government or whatever. Got a really funny thing going on with my hair there, so we're just gonna chill out here. But all right, this is so anyways, the Constitution lays out with the Bill of Rights what are going to be considered your civil liberties, and those civil liberties have been extended over time to non-U.S. citizens. So everybody that comes into the United States, either as an immigrant or a vacationer or someone that's just here legally or not legally, is entitled to these rights. And that's kind of a point of legal contention or political contention, but it's just a fact that inside the borders of the United States, individuals or persons receive these rights. Okay, so civil liberty for our sake is going to be a limit on the power of government that's there to protect the freedoms of individuals that government can't intrude on. So government can't pass laws that prevent you from speaking your mind. Now, that doesn't prevent, like in the First Amendment, like we have freedom of speech. That doesn't mean that your employer can't stop you from saying certain things. It's saying that the government can't pass laws to prevent you from saying certain things. Civil liberties are different than civil rights. Civil rights are basically a guarantee that government will treat people equally. Right. And so rather than we're going to make decisions based on merit rather than race, gender, or personal characteristics. So if you look at it, like civil liberties are freedoms to do certain things, and civil rights are freedoms from things like discrimination. Right. Our ideas of civil liberties both of these ideas come from the Declaration of Independence, and the fact that we make the statement that all men are created equal and that we're all given natural rights by God that can't be taken away. All right, so we have that. Book talks about the fact that the Constitution originally doesn't have a Bill of Rights. The framers believe that Article 1, Section 9 lists out 3 rights, and that was going to be enough to limit the powers of government. So no bill of attainder, no ex post facto laws, and then you can't suspend the right of habeas corpus. If you remember, bill of attainder is finding somebody guilty without a trial. Ex post facto laws are making a law go into effect retroactively. So you pass a law on Tuesday that says you can't, the stop sign's going to go in at the corner of Main and 2nd. But if you didn't stop that intersection on Monday, the day before the law went into effect, you're not going to get a ticket. And then if you get arrested, you can't be held without being charged with a crime. That's the idea of habeas corpus. Okay. However, there are examples when habeas corpus has been suspended, or where natural security rights or the rights for the nation to secure itself supersede individual liberties. Civil War is an example. In the state of Maryland, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus to ensure that Maryland didn't secede from the Union, and so like he locked up some newspaper editors and things like that. We'll have some other examples where the post office doesn't deliver certain material during the Civil War. During the Second World War, Roosevelt tries citizens in military courts for some crimes against the nation, and the Supreme Court holds up his right to do that. And then, of course, 9/11, we have prison camps on U.S. soil where we hold people indefinitely. Both Obama and Bush did that. And the Supreme Court upheld that. So we have that. Again, when the Constitution was proposed, the main objection was the lack of written rights. Well, boy, it should be rights. All right, rights. Written rights. That's funny. Save that. All right, so written rights. And the group that opposes the ratification of the Constitution is the Anti-Federalists, and we've already talked about that. We have a number of amendments that are proposed, and these are the ones that are passed. We have the First Amendment, freedom of speech, press, religion, right to assemble, petition to government. Second Amendment, right to bear arms in a well-regulated militia. Third Amendment is right to not have to have house soldiers during times of peace or war. Fourth Amendment is no unreasonable searches, seizures. Fifth Amendment is due process, indictment by grand jury for capital crimes, as well as the right to not testify against yourself. Sixth Amendment is right to a speedy trial. Seventh Amendment is a right to a jury trial in civil cases. Eighth Amendment is no excess fines or bails. Excuse me, fines or bails or cruel and unusual punishment. Ninth Amendment, the rights are retained by the people if they're not specifically given to Congress, and the states maintain rights that aren't specifically given to the federal government in the 10th Amendment. Extending the Bill of Rights to the states. It's interesting that, you know, I guess what you've always kind of thought, or I always kind of thought up until I started taking some higher level political science classes, that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution is always just extended to the state levels as well. So if you have the federal right, you also have the rights on the state level, and that's not the case. And so in the very first instance here, we have Barron versus Baltimore in the 1833, in which the Supreme Court ruled that the Bill of Rights only applies on the federal level and not on the state level. And so those rights that you have guaranteed in the first 10 amendments are only for federal crimes or federal, those are only federal rights, and states are going to decide what rights you have on a state-by-state basis. However, following the Civil War, as the power of the nation expands, you see the rights of people start to expand as well. And so like the 13th Amendment is going to bring an end to slavery right after the Civil War. And that's going to limit, you know, the rights of states to select things for themselves. Boom. The South began to pass black codes, which were basically new laws that start to limit the rights of former slaves. And so in response to that, in response to radical Reconstruction, we have the passage of the 14th Amendment that nationalizes or incorporates ideas like civil liberties and due process, equal protection, and citizenship on the state level. And then the 15th Amendment extends the right to vote in national elections to African-American men. Okay, so 14th Amendment, no state shall make or enforce laws which abridge the privilege of the citizens of the United States. So basically this, the immunities of the citizens of the United States. And so basically we're going to extend rights from the federal level throughout the states. Right, we have you can't punish somebody in one state. You have to treat non-state residents the same as you would treat a state resident. So like a speeding ticket can't be more for somebody in the state of Kansas. Let's say in the state of Kansas, if you have a resident driver from Kansas that gets pulled over and is going 10 over, their fine can't be less than somebody from Nebraska that has the same infraction. We have the idea of due process, which is actually in the 5th Amendment, but it's applied in the 14th Amendment to all the states. You can't take life, liberty, or property without due process of law. you have selective incorporation of the Bill of Rights, right? We kind of talked about that. So like not all, just because the 14th Amendment applies to all the state levels, not all the other amendments do. An example of this would be like recently McDonald versus Chicago was the Second Amendment state law that, or court case that incorporated the Second Amendment from just the federal level to state levels. You have that. Near versus Minnesota talks about censorship, and a lot of times censorship is left to local levels. Okay, First, Second, Third, and Fourth Amendments basically protect individual freedoms. The Fifth, Sixth, Seventh, and Eighth are people that are suspected of crimes or accused of crimes, and then the Ninth and 10th basically just showcase the fact that people have rights that aren't written down in the Constitution, that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution is not an exhaustive list of all the rights that people own. Okay, so the First Amendment can be made up of a couple different things. You have a couple different clauses. You have the Establishment Clause that basically prohibits the establishment of a state-sponsored religion. So the government of the United States can't form the Church of the United States, or the state of Kansas can't form the Church of Kansas. Lemon versus Kurtzman is the court case in which the Supreme Court created something called the Lemon Test, and the Lemon Test is one of the ways that the Supreme Court will look at laws that deal with religion, and to see if a law is for the general good, or if it's harming a specific religion or promoting a specific religion. So the Lemon Test has three branches or three steps it has to go through. It can't lead to excessive entanglements with the religion. So like, again, the states or the government can't establish their own religion. They can inhibit or advance religious practices. So you can't stop people from going to mass on Sunday, or you can't stop people from going to church on Sunday. And all laws that are passed have to have some kind of a secular purpose. And so the book does a pretty good job of giving you an example of like textbooks at a religious school. And you can read about that. You have the Free Exercise Clause. It's also part of the First Amendment. Government can't limit the ability to control or restrict religious practices. You can't make somebody work on the Sabbath. If you have people that are religiously conscientious objectors, you can't force someone to serve or fight in the military. Now, they could be forced to serve in a non-combat role, but that's Gillette against the United States, cited by the Supreme Court, that conscientious objection is allowed, but you have to have conscientious objection to all wars, not just the war that's being fought by the country at that time. You have certain like general laws, like education laws. You have Wisconsin versus Yoder, which was an Amish community that sued the state of Wisconsin about education laws and their ability to homeschool their children. And the Supreme Court went with them. Coming out of that Sherbert veneer case, you have the Sherbert test, which basically says that laws have to be narrowly tailored. Like there has to be a compelling government interest for a law to be in place if it affects religion, and it has to be written so as not to be overly broad. It can't affect a lot of different things. It has to be as focused as humanly possible. One of the examples that the book gives is the Employment Division versus Smith, in which you have some members of a Native American church that smoke peyote as part of religious practices. And then these individuals, their employer requires a random drug test, and they test positive for peyote, which is considered a drug by the United States government. Therefore, those people got fired. They filed for unemployment, and they were denied unemployment benefits because of being let go for drug use. And Smith, they've filed a complaint and it reached the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decided with the employers and the state of Oregon to deny these people's right to unemployment because the law was focused on drugs and wasn't aimed at preventing religious practice. Okay, recently we see the Religious Freedom Restoration Act come about. These are basically religious organizations that believe that their beliefs are under attack. Probably the most famous cases that come out of this are the Burwell versus Hobby Lobby, in which the Hobby Lobby, owner of Hobby Lobby, sued the federal government over the Affordable Care Act and its requirement that insurance make available contraceptives that include the Plan B contraceptive pill or just birth control in general. Hobby Lobby is owned by a conservative Christian that doesn't believe in contraceptives, and he says that like if he's forced to do this, that it violates his religious rights. And the Supreme Court agreed with him. Another example is the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission, in which a baker in Colorado denied a wedding cake to a same-sex couple. And they were in violation of Colorado Civil Rights Commission law. And so he sued that, and then it ended up going to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that the baker, the owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop, was not in violation of the First Amendment because he would, his objection was not to the gay couple or selling them a product. It was selling them an idea of a religious emblem, like a wedding cake. So he was open to selling them cakes or cookies or whatever, but not decorating a wedding cake, which was an expression of his artistic talents. Okay, First Amendment, you also have freedom of expression, which is speech, press, assembly, and petition. Again, we talked about wartime censorship. World War I, you start to see the limits, limiting of opinions of pro-German and pro-communist newspapers, and those were for national security reasons. Pro-German during World War I, because before America enters the war, America is very involved with the British, while America's main immigrant population was German. And so the government was trying to change public opinion. And then pro-communist opinions, because the Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union during that time, one of the goals of communism and Bolshevikism was to overthrow the Western world. And so obviously you're trying to limit some of that, those ideas if you're a capitalist government in the West. And those limitations were allowed. I'm not sure if they would be today, but they were back then. You have a court case there, Schneck versus United States, in which the court ruled that encouraging young men to dodge the draft during the First World War could damage the country, and they called it a clear and present danger for the nation. And so many people were sent to jail, or some people were sent to jail, and encouraging people to avoid military service during the First World War. You have the case in Ohio there, in which the court ruled that like groups like the Klan could only be held accountable for actions if they have a direct call for action, or they have a well-developed plan for lawless action, and that could be suppressed ahead of time. So you have those things. Prior restraint, we talk about that. The government can't prohibit somebody from printing something without a compelling reason. That's Neer versus Minnesota. Another example of that is the Pentagon Papers, in which information about the Vietnam War was made public. A more modern example is the work of Edward Snowden and the NSA. And again, the book does a nice job of pointing out the fact that while Snowden can be held accountable, for his actions, newspapers are typically free from ramifications of printing that story. So there's a lot of stuff there. There's New York Times versus Sullivan. Freedom of speech and press is not absolute. You can't incite someone to do a crime. We're kind of seeing that with the former president, President Trump, with his speeches in that rally on January 6th. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the next year. The fighting words. So obviously you can't say something to someone that is going to cause a reaction, a predictable reaction. You can't have threatening or symbolic speech. So like the book uses the example of burning a cross on a African-American's family lawn. That is not protected by freedom of speech. Obscenity is also not protected by freedom of speech. The court case that brings about a test for this is the Miller test, in which what the Supreme Court uses to decide if something is obscene is considered the Miller test. There's three branches to this. The first one is if an average person in an average person of the community looking at the work as a whole would see it as obscene. Okay, the problem with that is, do people in New York City have a different set of values than the people in Salt Lake City, or somebody from Chase, Kansas? Are they going to have different opinions than somebody from Los Angeles, California? It's obscene if it depicts if the actions in the work are considered illegal. And then finally, the work taken as a whole does it lack value. The book uses the Janet Jackson Super Bowl wardrobe malfunction as an example, where CBS got fined like $500,000 for Janet Jackson's exposing herself to the Super Bowl when her wardrobe exposed her chest to the nation, versus like Schindler's List, which was shown in the entirety, which had violence and nudity, but because there was value in the work as a whole, that was not fined. Schools don't have total freedom of the press. They have they're receiving federal money. They need to have at least internet. At least K through 12 schools have to have an internet filter, and advertising can't be fraudulent. So you can't make false claims with advertising, as you can be charged with fraud. Court cases, you have time and place limitations, like on the Westboro Family Baptist Church out of Topeka, that are kind of a controversial group. They they protest military funerals or gay funerals or whatever, and they believe that they believe in some different things. And the Supreme Court has ruled that they have a right to protest, but typically those protests have to be limited in scope and time and place. So they can't protest at midnight on the middle of this open city street. Typically, they can protest. Like I was at a high school where they protested, and they could protest from, I think, like 2 to 3 o'clock or 2:30 to 3 o'clock on a certain area of a public sidewalk, and that was it. And it was kind of interesting. So you have limitations on those types of things. Second Amendment recently has been incorporated into the states. Before the Civil War, the Second Amendment really wasn't all that controversial, because most people owned guns, and adults were expected to own guns and serve in local militias. But following the Civil War, after the Civil War, the Black Codes limited African Americans from owning guns or ownership of guns by former slaves. And so in 1876, the Supreme Court refused to step in and strike down those laws. In 1934, the United States Supreme Court ruled in favor of gun control laws, making sawed-off shotguns illegal, because the idea of a sawed-off shotgun was that they would serve no function in a well-regulated militia. And then in the 2010s, 2008, 2010, the Supreme Court changed their tune and basically said that some gun control laws did violate the Second Amendment, and that the purpose of the Second Amendment wasn't for a well-regulated militia, but it was for self-protection, right? And so 2010, the Supreme Court overruled Crenshank and said that the Second Amendment and gun ownership was a fundamental right. But it's not an absolute right, because like in 2015, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of strict handgun laws within San Francisco. And so this idea of gun ownership and what constitutes gun ownership as a constitutional right is still up for debate. And it's interesting where this will go in the next 15, 20 years. A lot of it's gonna tie into how the Supreme Court rules that idea of a well-regulated militia, or the right to arms shouldn't be infringed. So which half of the amendment are you going to put the most weight into? And we can kind of see there's a little teeter-totter there. The Third Amendment of no quartering soldiers in your private home is kind of an outdated law, but or it's kind of obsolete. Like, you know, the government probably wouldn't look to put a house or a soldier in your home now, but it does show that homes or private residences are a zone of privacy. The Fourth Amendment adds to that, and the fact that persons, homes, papers, and effects are protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. Basically, it requires the use of a search warrant. Search warrants are pretty easy to get. However, you know, this amendment does protect us from just random searches in your house, from police, you know, just walking, let's say drug dogs up and down the sidewalk and waiting for a dog to hit on your house if you have narcotics inside. There are limits to the Fourth Amendment, like if you're outside of your home, your car can be searched if you get pulled over, if the police have probable cause. They can definitely look inside your car from the outside without a search warrant. You're well within your rights to demand a search warrant for a police officer to actually remove you from your vehicle and look inside your vehicle, unless they have probable cause. They can search people entering the country or exiting the country. We see the exclusionary rule that gets developed, the Map versus Ohio case, or the Weeks versus the United States case, in which if the police find evidence without a search warrant, that evidence can't be introduced into a criminal trial. And furthermore, they find evidence that leads to additional evidence that can't be introduced. Or if they find evidence that lead to additional crimes, you can't be charged for those additional crimes because the original evidence was found illegally. Now, there are some exemptions to this, like the good faith rule. Like if, you know, evidence would have been found under normal circumstances, then yes, a lot of times that can be used. People can't be arrested without a warrant unless like a crime is witnessed by a police officer. However, police can detain people, and if they can establish probable cause for a crime, then they can arrest people. Fifth Amendment has many different parts. Serious crimes have to be indicted by a grand jury. So basically you have a grand jury and a prosecutor that selects a grand jury and then presents evidence of a crime taking place, and has a lower bar to pass over. for a trial to take part. So if a grand jury hears a trial or a presentation of evidence, they only have to agree that there's a high likelihood or probable cause or probable chance that a crime took place. You're protected from double jeopardy. You can't be tried for the same crime twice. However, you can't be tried on different levels of the court system for the same crime. So you get acquitted in criminal court, you can be sued in civil court. If you get tried at a state level for a crime, you can also get tried for that same crime on a federal level, or a different charge on a federal level. You're protected against self-incrimination. You don't have to talk about, you don't have to answer any questions. You don't have to incriminate yourself. You also don't have to take the stand in your defense in a court case. And if you choose not to, that can be seen as that's not seen as an admission of guilt. I would assume that we're all probably familiar with the Miranda warnings. In fact, that when you're arrested, the police officers are supposed to read you your Miranda rights, which are you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one will be appointed to you. And that's from a 1960s case in Arizona, in which Miranda was arrested and admitted to a crime without knowing his rights. Interestingly enough, Miranda gets out of prison because of that oversight. And then Miranda was kind of a lot of these people that are in these civil famous Supreme Court cases aren't necessarily good people. Miranda was not. He was a lifetime criminal. And so anyways, he gets out of jail. He ends up in a bar fight and gets stabbed, and he dies. And so actually the guy that kills Miranda is arrested and read his Miranda rights, which is kind of ironic. That happens in the 1970s. Okay, due process of law. You can't be denied life, liberty, or process without due process. Private property can't be taken for public use without just compensation. You have the right to economic liberty. You have a right to use your knowledge and trade and skills in exchange for money, and the government can't force you to work without compensation. Eminent domain. If you own a piece of property and the government needs it for a pipeline to pass through or a highway to pass through or whatever, the government has a right to buy your property from you for a fair price. So one person basically can't hold up development. And the book talks about that, does a nice job. It's pretty straightforward. Sixth Amendment, you have a right to speedy and public trial. You can call witnesses in your defense. Even if a witness does not want to comply, the court can force them to. You have a right to an attorney. Gideon versus Wainwright in 1963 establishes that even if you can't afford an attorney, the state or the government will provide one for you for any type of case in which your personal liberty is in question. Even if you lose your liberty only for one day, that is enough to constitute a public defender being put in place for you. Seventh Amendment, basically in a civil case, you have the right to a trial by jury unless both sides agree to waive this. And the Seventh Amendment limits the rights of a judge to reconsider questions of fact. So basically, the judge can't change the judge can't change verdicts based on after they've been decided by a jury. And so an appeals court or appeals judge could throw something out, but he can't change the original jury ruling. Or he can't change fact, he can't change judgment, if that makes sense. So he can throw a case out, but he can't change the outcome. Eighth Amendment, no excessive bail and no cruel and unusual punishment. I think you'll see in our lifetime, you'll see some court cases come up about this with excessive bail and what is excessive bail? And is bail just a form of any type of bail? on nonviolent crimes? Is it really just a form of punishing those in poverty? That's going to be something that comes up here before too long, I would assume. The Ninth Amendment basically says that people have certain rights that aren't listed in the Bill of Rights, like the right to marry, right to work, education, right to have kids, or raise those kids as a family. You have a right to privacy that comes out. And so those are in the Ninth Amendment, and the 10th Amendment basically says that states can they can guarantee more rights than the federal government, but if the federal government takes away somebody's rights through the amendment process, then the states can't offer those rights. So the states can extend more rights or additional rights, but state of California can't just decide that they're going to have a purge because they have too many people, because that would be a violation of due process if it costs somebody life or liberty or property. Okay, so privacy, you have Lawrence versus Texas, so that decriminalizes sodomy between consenting adults. Basically, these are laws that go into effect that basically consenting adults behind closed doors can do what they want as long as it's within reason. And we have a greater degree of privacy within our homes. However, when you're in your home and you're on the internet, are you really in your home? Are you in a public space? So far, the Supreme Court has ruled that digital communications on the internet are like public activity. But at the same time, like your cell phone and the use of cell phone location data is protected by the 14th Amendment. So the Supreme Court or the police would have to get search warrants for that information. So you have this kind of, you have a dichotomy of viewpoints here, like online activity is public activity, but just because you have a cell phone and people have the ability to track you doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a public spot. So that's where we are for chapter 4. Get this up here shortly, and then we'll get your quizzes and your assignments up. And chapter 5 will be up later in the day. Hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.